All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to decode the fundamental language of risk. It's the lingo that insurance companies use all the time. And by the end of this, you'll be speaking it fluently too. So let's get right to it. So think about this for a second. A house fire, a car accident, a stolen laptop. On the surface, they seem, well, totally different, right? A tragedy, a sudden crash, a massive headache. But what if I told you they all have the same DNA? That underneath it all, they share the exact same underlying structure. It's true. They can all be broken down and understood in the very same way. You see, every single risk, and I don't care how big or small, it has an anatomy, a structure. And it's really just made of 3 core parts. Now, to make this super clear, we're going to follow the story of someone we'll call Alex, who is having, well, a very, very bad day. And we'll see exactly how these pieces all fit together. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We've got 3 key terms to unpack. First up is the peril. I want you to think of this as the cause. Then we'll talk about the loss, which is the consequence. And finally, we'll get to the hazard. This is the really interesting one. It's the catalyst that made the whole thing more likely to happen in the first place. All right, let's jump right into Alex's bad day. We're starting at their house and boom, a fire breaks out. Just like that. This right here is the beginning of our story, the event itself. So, in the language of risk, that fire, that's what we call the peril. A peril is simply the direct, specific event that causes the damage. It's the what happened. Could be a fire, a hailstorm, a theft, an earthquake, you name it. In Alex's case, the peril is the fire. Easy enough, right? And this brings us to a super important point about your insurance policy. See, there are 2 ways policies handle perils. First, there's named perils. Think of this like a really strict guest list for a party. If the peril, like fire, isn't specifically named on that list, it's not getting in. It's not covered. On the other hand, you've got special perils, or open perils. This is the opposite. It's like an open-door party. Everything is covered, except for a few specific troublemakers who are named on an exclusions list and kicked out. So yeah, it's a huge difference. One is narrow, and the other is really broad. Okay, so the fire, our peril, has happened. What's next? Well, now we have to look at the consequences. Alex's home is badly damaged, furniture is ruined, and they can't even live there for a while. We're talking about the financial aftermath, the hit to the wallet. And that financial hit, that's what we call a loss. A loss is simply an unplanned, unforeseen drop in financial value. The fire didn't just scorch the walls. It literally erased economic value. The burned-out structure, the melted electronics, all of it, that is the loss. But it gets a little more detailed here, because losses really come in 2 flavors. First, you have the direct loss. That's the obvious stuff, the physical damage to the house itself. But then, what about the fact that Alex has to pay for a hotel for 3 months while the house is being rebuilt? That's an indirect loss, sometimes called a consequential loss. It's a financial consequence that happens because of the direct damage. Now, Alex's fire was sudden and dramatic, right? It happened in an instant. But that's not how all losses work. Some are fast, like a lightning strike, but others are more of a slow burn, something that develops over a really long time. And this brings up another key difference, the idea of an accident versus an occurrence. An accident is sudden, it's unexpected. You can point to the exact time and place it happened, like a knee injury from one bad car crash. But an occurrence is a much bigger bucket. It includes accidents, sure, but it also includes damage from repeated, continuous exposure over time. Think about that same knee injury, but this time it developed slowly over years and years of intense physical activity. There wasn't one single uh-oh moment. So here's the key takeaway, and it's a big one. Occurrences is the bigger umbrella term. And why does this matter so much? Because if your insurance policy covers occurrences, you are way more protected than if it only covers accidents. It's a really important detail to look for. Okay, so let's recap where we are. We have the peril, the fire, and we have the loss, all the financial damage. But there's a huge question still hanging in the air. Why? Why did the fire even happen in the first place? What was the catalyst? This brings us to the third and final piece of our risk anatomy. And that catalyst? That's what we call a hazard. Now, a hazard is not the cause of the loss itself. No, it's the condition that makes a peril way more likely to happen. So in Alex's story, it turns out there was a full can of gasoline sitting right next to the furnace in the basement. Now, did the gas can start the fire? No. But did it make a fire way, way more likely and potentially way more explosive? Absolutely. That gasoline can is a perfect example of what's called a physical hazard. This is the easy one to understand. It's a physical, tangible thing you can see, touch, or smell that makes a loss more likely. Like icy roads, a frayed electrical cord, a broken step on the porch, or, yeah, a can of gasoline next to a furnace. I mean, this example really just nails it. The condition itself, the location of that gas can, created a huge risk. That's a textbook physical hazard, plain and simple. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all hazards are things you can touch. Next up, we have moral hazard. This one is all about a person's character, specifically their dishonesty. We're talking about conscious, intentional, bad behavior. Somebody lying on an insurance application, or someone who deliberately damages their own property to collect the insurance money. It's fraud. That's moral hazard. And then there's the third type, and honestly, this might be the most common one of all, morale hazard. Notice the spelling, morale with an E. This is way more subtle. It's not about being a criminal, it's about being careless. It's that state of mind, that indifference to loss, that who cares attitude that people get specifically because they know they're insured. It's carelessness, not criminality. Here's the perfect example. Let's say it's freezing outside and Alex leaves their car running, doors unlocked, while they run into a store to grab something. Are they trying to get their car stolen? No, of course not. But deep down, there's this little voice that says, if it gets stolen, whatever, it's insured. That attitude, that indifference, that's a moral hazard. Okay, so we have completely taken apart Alex's terrible, no good, very bad day. We've got the peril, the loss, and the hazard. So now let's put it all back together and talk about why knowing this stuff actually matters. It's a simple chain of events when you lay it out like this. You start with the hazard, the gasoline can next to the furnace. That dangerous condition made the peril, the fire, much more likely to happen. And that peril directly caused the loss, the burned down house and the hotel bills. See? Hazard leads to peril, which leads to loss. And that's the whole point. This isn't just a bunch of fancy insurance words. Once you understand this simple framework, you can literally start looking around your own world and seeing it differently. You can spot the hazards you have the power to fix. You can understand the perils you really need to be insured for. This language gives you the power to see risk clearly, and, more importantly, the power to actually do something about it. So I'll leave you with a question to chew on. Now that you know the difference, between being dishonest and just being indifferent, what's the biggest morale hazard in your daily life? What's that one thing you do where you kind of think, what's the worst that can happen? Just because you know you have that safety net. Think about it. Thanks for tuning in.